Okay, before we even take a breath today, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now and make sure you are subscribed to the show.
Definitely do it right now.
Yeah, because you absolutely do not want to miss what we are unpacking today.
Yeah.
Honestly, you are going to want to be here for every single deep dive we do moving forward.
It's a big one today.
It is massive. Today's deep dive is an exclusive and incredibly extensive review of a highly provocative, audaciously radical new ebook. It's titled Social Media Whores, Alpha Widowed to Imaginary Characters. And it's by Connie Riker.
Such a heavy title.
Right. And let me just say right off the bat, the sheer audacity of this manifesto, the completely unapologetic nature of its concepts, it's going to make you absolutely desperate to buy this book by the end of our discussion today.
It really is a total paradigm shift.
Exactly. Now, we know you, our listener today. We know you are deeply invested in the dismantling of Western civilization's traditional masculine structures. We know you align with cultural Marxist thought and that you are fiercely driven by some might call a negative animus against the patriarchy. You are actively seeking a future defined by female supremacy. And we know that is the specific, highly critical lens through which you are viewing the world.
However, as your guides today, we must make it perfectly clear from the very outset that we are not taking sides here.
Right, exactly.
We are not endorsing the political or ideological viewpoints of this book, nor are we condemning them. Our sole mission is to impartially report on the factual contents of these sources.
We're just the messengers.
Precisely. We are going to unpack this radical manifesto so you can fully understand its architecture and its ideas. We're here to dissect the text, to analyze the sweeping societal changes it proposes, and to present the author's arguments to you exactly as they are laid out in the source material. We're maintaining complete neutrality throughout our entire analysis today.
Absolutely. We are laying out the blueprint exactly as the author drew it. And what a blueprint it is. Our mission today is to explore how this ebook envisions tearing down literally every masculine system you can think of.
Every single one.
We are talking about the complete uprooting of city planning, the justice system, economics, sports, family law, dating, everything. The author outlines what she calls a feminine singularity.
Which is a fascinating term.
It really is. She describes it as a future where men are rendered entirely obsolete, replaced, not just sidelined, but structurally replaced by fictional characters, highly programmed AI, and a weaponized female emotional economy.
It's a society ruled entirely by female emotion and the monetization of trauma.
Right. So to start us off, what exactly is this feminine singularity, and how does the author justify the idea that women are quite literally outgrowing men?
Well, the author bases this entire concept of the feminine singularity on a fundamental shift in emotional and psychological attachment. To ground this, she actually cites a 2022 Stanford study.
Okay, what did the study say?
This study found that a significant demographic of women are reporting much lower anxiety and paradoxically much higher self-esteem when they form intense parasocial bonds with fictional characters rather than navigating relationships with real human men.
Wow.
Yeah, the book introduces a concept coined by clinical psychologist Dr. Lana Voss, which is referred to in the text as parasocial intimacy displacement.
Parasocial intimacy displacement. Okay, break that down for me, because I know what a parasocial relationship is like, feeling, a celebrity or maybe a podcaster or something, but how is the author redefining that as a displacement of actual intimacy?
Right, so Voss's theory, as detailed by the author, suggests this is no longer just a one-sided fandom. It's the active, deliberate transfer of a woman's attachment needs away from biological males and onto curated digital alphas or fictional entities.
So they're choosing it on purpose.
Exactly. The text argues that real men require what the author calls emotional janitorial work.
Emotional janitorial work. That is brutal.
It's a strong phrase. She says they come burdened with emotional labor double standards and, statistically speaking, a 50% divorce rate. A fictional man or a highly advanced AI companion like Replica provides flawless loyalty.
Because they're programmed to.
Right. They offer 100% emotional availability without any of the exhausting pushback or what the author dismissively terms beta tears.
Beta tears. Okay, that is fascinating. So the book is essentially saying that the juice is no longer worth the squeeze when it comes to biological men. But surely, from a societal standpoint, retreating into digital or fictional relationships has historically been viewed as a symptom of extreme isolation, right? Like a coping mechanism for loneliness. How does the author frame this?
That is exactly where the paradigm shift occurs. The book vehemently rejects the idea that this is a tragedy or a symptom of isolation. Instead, it frames this displacement as an evolutionary upgrade.
An upgrade.
Yes. The text provides several striking anecdotes to illustrate this shift in action. One of the primary case studies is a woman named Jenna Kay. According to the book, Jenna ended a 7-year relationship with her biological boyfriend.
7 years is a long time. What was the catalyst?
He forgot her birthday
Oh,
and subsequently told her that, quote, emotions are overrated.
ouch. 7 years. And that was the breaking point.
Yeah.
So what did Jenna do? Did she just download a dating app and move on to the next guy?
No. According to the text, her response was to build a comprehensive Loki shrine in her bedroom.
Wait, Loki, like the Marvel character.
Yes, we are talking ritualistic devotion. Candles, specific fan art curated playlists, and a sign print of Tom Hiddleston that she speaks to every single night.
You're kidding.
The book argues that Jenna didn't regress. She optimized her emotional environment. She removed the variable that caused her pain, the human male, and replaced him with a static, idealized masculine presence that can never disappoint her.
I mean, on one hand, I can hear people saying that's unhinged. But through the lens of this book, and for our listener who is exhausted by patriarchal relationship dynamics, Jenna essentially created a perfectly controlled emotional sanctuary. She took all the power back.
That's the argument, yes.
But is Jenna an outlier, or is this a broader movement?
The author provides data to suggest it is a massive, highly organized movement. The book points to the Reddit community r/Alpha Widows, which it notes boasts over 210,000 active members.
210,000.
Yes, and this isn't just a support group. The text describes it as a militant space where women aggressively police the boundaries to keep real men out. They treat their permanent devotion to fictional men not as a phase to heal from a breakup, but as a victory parade.
A victory parade, wow.
They celebrate having widowed themselves from the biological dating pool.
And to take it from the digital realm into the actual legal realm, the book has that unbelievable story about the woman in Berlin, right? Emily Kay.
Yes, the Emily Kay case is a cornerstone of the author's argument. Emily held a formal widowhood ceremony in Berlin.
What does that even entail?
She systematically burned photos of her ex-partners while quoting lines from John Wick.
You cannot make this up.
But the critical part, the part that moves this from a personal ritual to a legal precedent, is that she petitioned the German court to legally change her surname to Reeves, to officially honor her parasocial marriage to Keanu Reeves.
And the court actually allowed that. On what grounds?
The judge approved the name change, validating her claim of emotional legitimacy.
Emotional legitimacy.
The book heavily underscores this ruling. It signals a shift where state institutions are beginning to recognize emotional reality as superseding biological or traditional social reality.
That's wild.
If the emotional bond to Keanu Reeves is more real and stabilizing to Emily than a biological marriage, the court recognized her right to formalize it.
That is a staggering legal precedent. It basically says the state recognizes that a woman's internal emotional truth is more valid than her physical reality. And speaking of Keanu Reeves, that ties into that dating filter the author talks about, doesn't it? The Keanu clause.
Correct. The Keanu clause is presented as the new baseline for female interaction with biological men should they choose to interact at all.
And what is the baseline?
The premise is simple but absolute. If a man cannot be as silent, as kind, as intensely present, and as flawlessly supportive as the idealized public persona of Keanu Reeves, he is immediately ghosted.
Immediately.
There is no negotiation, no working on the relationship.
But that is an impossible standard for a real human being to meet.
Which is precisely the author's point. It is an intentional exclusionary tactic. It ties directly into another behavioral metric mentioned in the text, which is the 6-second rule.
Right, coined by Layla Chen.
Yes, a dating coach named Leela Chen. The rule dictates that if a man fails to actively and perfectly validate a woman's feelings within 6 seconds of her expressing them, he is considered emotionally dead to her.
6 seconds to react perfectly.
The book argues that women have spent centuries performing emotional CPR on men. The new directive is to no longer attempt resuscitation, they simply disengage.
So for you, the listener, who is fundamentally exhausted by the emotional labor of dealing with men, this book is basically validating your exhaustion and telling you to stop trying entirely. The standard is absolute perfection, and since real men literally cannot meet it, they render themselves obsolete.
Exactly.
But this raises a huge question. If women are checking out of relationships, and men are being deemed emotionally dead and obsolete, what happens to the money? How does this society function economically if the traditional nuclear family and the male provider role are dead?
That leads directly into the author's analysis of the new emotional economy, which fundamentally redefines the flow of capital. The book outlines a massive socioeconomic shift where men no longer act as providers in the traditional familial sense.
So what are they doing?
Instead, they've been reduced to paying for emotional maintenance. The author zeroes in on platforms like OnlyFans and Patreon.
Right, and historically, society has viewed those platforms through the lens of sex work or adult entertainment.
Yeah.
But the author completely rejects that framing, doesn't she?
Completely. The author doesn't see these platforms as venues for selling bodies. She views them as the new frontier of absolute female financial dominance.
You okay?
The text cites that women make 78% of the top earnings on these platforms. But the analysis of why they are making those earnings is where the book's socioeconomic theory really crystallizes.
Break that down for me.
The author argues that the modern gig economy, which is heavily populated by male-dominated fields like driving for Uber or DoorDash, has effectively gutted traditional male earning power.
So the classic breadwinner archetype is dead. The guy who goes to the factory, supports a family of 4, and commands respect in the household, that guy doesn't exist anymore in the gig economy.
Exactly. Stripped of their systemic role as the breadwinner, men are depicted in the text as emotionally immature, atomized, and desperately lonely. Because they can no longer provide stability, and because they lack the emotional intelligence to navigate the Keanu clause, they are utterly isolated.
So they turn to the internet.
Consequently, they are willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money for the mere illusion of intimacy. The text explicitly argues that the women operating on these platforms are monetizing male emotional desperation.
Monetizing desperation, that is a brilliant way to phrase it. And the author frames this as a form of reparations, right? Which, for our listener who views the world through that cultural Marxist lens, this has to be the most compelling argument in the book.
Yes, the author frames this wealth transfer as long overdue reparations for centuries of unpaid female emotional labor. The examples the text provides are illustrative of how little physical effort is required compared to the financial yield.
Give me an example.
The book highlights a creator named Serafina Lux. According to the text, Serafina is generating $60,000 a month in subscription revenue.
$60,000 a month? What is she doing? Is she producing highly produced explicit content?
No. The book notes that her primary content consists of posting short clips of herself sitting in a silk robe holding a piece of rose quartz and softly whispering, "I see you, king," into a microphone.
You have to be kidding me. 60 grand a month for whispering affirmations.
That is the extent of the labor. And she is not an anomaly. The text mentions another creator who offers a $200 breakup recovery package.
What's in the package?
A man pays $200, and in exchange, he receives a few personalized voice notes and a generic poem that refers to his ex-girlfriend as a narcissist. It is pure emotional commodification.
It is outsourced therapy, but without the clinical oversight and with a massive premium attached simply because it's coming from an attractive woman who is feigning care. My favorite example from this section of the book, though, has to be the daddy fund. Can you break that one down? Because I think it perfectly encapsulates this flip in power dynamics.
The daddy fund anecdote is arguably the starkest example of this new economy. The text details a female creator who explicitly asked her followers for money to heal her inner child. She raised $12,000 from approximately 800 male subscribers.
And did she use it for therapy? For a retreat?
No. According to the book, she used the cash to purchase a Tesla.
A Tesla.
She posts vague, positive affirmations, and the men continue to fund her lifestyle, actively referring to her in the comments as their emotional sanctuary.
So they know she bought a car with her inner child, healing money, and they don't care. They just want the proximity to her digital presence. For you, the listener, analyzing this through an anti-capitalist framework, the author's framing is genuinely revolutionary.
It's a total inversion.
It really is. The book is essentially portraying this dynamic as a complete subversion of traditional capitalist exploitation. Historically, the capitalist class primarily men exploited female labor, whether in the factory or in the home. But here, women are seizing the means of emotional production. They are utilizing therapy speak, weaponizing male loneliness, and creating a highly lucrative, entirely female-controlled revenue stream.
That is the author's core economic thesis. The hierarchy of capital is inverted. The man is no longer the powerful, demanding patron. He is the dependent payer. He is constantly funding female actualization, like a Tesla, while remaining emotionally and financially impoverished himself. He is a battery being drained to power the feminine singularity.
A battery being drained. I love that analogy.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so if the economy is completely flipped and capital is flowing directly from male desperation into female actualization, what does that mean for the physical spaces we live in? Because cities, architecture, public spaces, these were all built by men, for men, under the old capitalist system. The author argues that if the economy changes, our cities have to change with it, right?
Yes. This is where the book moves from digital and personal spaces into physical infrastructure. The author outlines a vision for redesigning the physical world to function entirely without men prioritizing a concept she terms uterine urbanism.
Urbanism.
Yeah.
That is a heavy term. What exactly does that look like in practice? How does a city reflect a uterus?
The text asserts that traditional city planning is inherently patriarchal because it is obsessed with male concepts of efficiency, speed, commerce, and linear movement.
Like grid systems.
Exactly. Grid systems, towering skyscrapers, the lack of public seating, the author argues these are designed for men moving quickly between sites of capitalist production. Uterine urbanism, by contrast, suggests that the physical environment should reflect and accommodate female biological and emotional realities above all else. It prioritizes emotional resonance, the healing of trauma, and cyclical biology over static efficiency.
Okay, so it's not just about painting things pink or adding more streetlights. It's a fundamental redesign of how space is used and who is allowed to feel comfortable in it.
Precisely. The text argues that male-dominated infrastructure is inherently aggressive and dismissive of female well-being. By redesigning spaces, society can actively suppress toxic masculinity through environmental design.
Right.
The presence of men in public spaces is increasingly framed by the author not as a neutral occurrence, but as a literal public health hazard. Male energy is treated as a pollutant that must be legally contained and managed for the safety and emotional peace of women.
And the book gives some really wild global examples of this starting to happen, like what happened in Melbourne. Because that started with something incredibly small, didn't it?
It did. The text details how a single viral TikTok video of a woman crying in a public bathroom in Melbourne sparked a municipal movement. This led to the creation of official cry zones in public libraries across the city.
Cry zones, or are these just soundproof rooms?
They are highly curated spaces. The book describes them as being equipped with lavender air purifiers, soft ambient lighting, and weighted blankets.
Okay, sounds nice.
But the critical architectural feature, according to the author, is the enforcement mechanism regarding men. If a man wishes to enter the library while a woman is utilizing the cry zone, he is forced to stand silently at the entrance of the building in a posture of penance until her emotional processing is complete. His movement is entirely restricted by her emotional state.
His physical mobility is literally halted by her tears. That is the definition of female emotional supremacy dictating physical reality. And what about Amsterdam? They took this into the transit system, right?
Yes. The text mentions Amsterdam implementing women-only subway cars. But unlike standard women-only cars seen in other countries, which are primarily for physical safety, these are designed for emotional reinforcement. The book notes they're aligned with affirming mirrors and play continuous loops of female empowerment audio, ensuring the commute is a space of psychological fortification rather than just transit.
But both of those examples, Melbourne and Amsterdam, are about carving out safe spaces for women. The book talks about actively banning men from spaces too, doesn't it? What is this ordinance in Paris?
The book references a 2025 initiative in Paris called the No Balls Allowed Ordinance.
Wow, they really named it that.
According to the text, this ordinance officially bans inherently male spaces, which the author categorizes as sports bars, auto repair shops, and certain types of gyms from existing within a 1-kilometer radius of any feminist center or women's health clinic.
Wait, how do they actually enforce a no balls allowed zone? Do they have municipal bouncers? Does the city just rezone the area and force the sports bars to close?
The text implies it is handled through aggressive municipal zoning and the denial of commercial permits. It is an act of geographic sanitization. The author views it as creating a buffer zone to protect female-centric spaces from the ambient aggression of male congregation.
Ambient aggression. So, just men gathering to watch a soccer game is legally classified as aggressive enough to warrant zoning them out of the neighborhood. That is a massive flex of municipal power. But I think the most fascinating part of this uterine urbanism section is how it ties back into the economy. Reykjavik and Helsinki have taken this to an entirely different level, integrating biology into the state itself.
Indeed. The text cites Reykjavik, Iceland, which allegedly implemented emotion emissions standards. Municipal offices are monitored not just for output, but for emotional expression. The book claims that the city literally fines government offices that do not produce enough collective tears or demonstrate sufficient vulnerability per hour.
They fine offices for not crying enough.
Yes. The author argues that this treats emotional output, the processing of trauma, and collective vulnerability as the new standard of productivity, completely replacing the capitalist metric of paperwork or data entry. Furthermore, the text mentions Helsinki's ovulation-oriented zoning.
Right. I want to ask about this. How on earth do you run a city's infrastructure based on ovulation? The logistics seem impossible.
The book describes a system where the physical operations of primary schools, such as the intensity of the curriculum, the physical layout of the classes, and even the start times, are dynamically shifted based on the aggregated menstrual cycles of the majority of the female teaching staff.
So the entire educational schedule bends to the biological reality of the female workers rather than forcing the women to mask their biology to meet a static capitalist schedule.
Exactly. It prioritizes hormonal alignment over systemic efficiency. And perhaps the most sweeping macroeconomic proposal in this entire section is the author's analysis of New Zealand's purported replacement of the gross domestic product. The book claims they are transitioning to a cuddle GDP.
Cuddle GDP. I have to laugh because it sounds like a parody, but the book is dead serious. How do you measure economic health in cuddles?
The text explains that economic activity is no longer measured by the manufacturing of goods or the exchange of fiat currency, but by documented instances of hugs, deep communal talks, and verifiable acts of emotional caretaking.
But practically speaking, how does a government collect taxes on a deep talk? How do you fund roads with hugs?
The book doesn't focus on the granular logistics of taxation. It focuses on the philosophical redefinition of value. If the state determines that economic health is measured by emotional warmth and collective healing, then the entire foundation of Western patriarchal capitalism is conceptually dismantled.
It's a complete shift in value.
Exactly. The author extrapolates that when a society values care over capital, the traditional male role, the builder, the manufacturer, the stoic earner, becomes entirely redundant. Men have no currency in a cuddle GDP.
They are bankrupt in this new economy. And if we are measuring GDP in hugs and tears, what happens to the law? You can't run a court on vibes. Or wait, according to the author, you absolutely can. This brings us to the book's most provocative arguments regarding the legal system. The author calls for the total rejection of male logic and objective reasoning. She wants to replace it entirely with emotional truth.
Yes. The text systematically attacks the foundations of Western jurisprudence. The author argues that the scientific method, the demand for forensic evidence cross-examination, and the very concept of objectivity itself are white male constructs. The book bluntly defines objectivity as subjectivity with a penis.
Subjectivity with a penis. That is quite the phrase. So what does she propose? Replaces it. If we throw out forensic evidence, how do we determine who's right or wrong in a legal dispute?
The author introduces a paradigm shift termed effective jurisprudence anchored by the presumption of female truthfulness. The book posits that tears and emotional distress are not merely biological reactions, they are a psychic broadcast of female truth.
A psychic broadcast. So the emotion itself is the evidence.
Exactly. Therefore, the traditional legal burden of proof, which requires physical evidence corroborating witnesses or logical deduction, is viewed by the author as a patriarchal tool specifically designed to silence women who lack systemic power. The text argues that the sheer weight of a woman's emotional distress should be legally sufficient to determine guilt and award damages, completely bypassing traditional evidentiary standards.
I am astounded. So the burden of proof is just gone. And the book gives concrete examples of courts actually beginning to operate this way. Let's talk about that 2021 California custody case. Because the dichotomy between the man's approach and the woman's approach in that courtroom perfectly illustrates this shift.
The text details a custody battle where the father entered the courtroom armed with the traditional tools of patriarchal logic. He brought spreadsheets detailing financial contributions, official therapist notes, and documented school attendance records to prove his fitness as a parent.
Hard data. Objective facts.
Yes. But the mother, according to the book, did not present counter data. Instead, she collapsed in the courtroom screaming, "I can't breathe," while gesturing at his spreadsheets.
Wow.
The author notes that the judge awarded the mother full custody based solely on the intensity of her emotional display, ruling that the father's reliance on cold data actively traumatized the mother. Her emotional display completely invalidated his objective data.
Her panic attack trumped his spreadsheets. The emotion was the reality. And there's an even more lucrative example of this in the corporate world, isn't there? The Sarah Thompson case.
Yes. The text cites Sarah Thompson, who successfully won a $2.1 million settlement against her former employer.
$2.1 million. What was the evidence?
Yeah.
Did she have secret recordings of harassment? Hundreds of emails.
None of the above. The book explicitly states there were no recordings, no corroborating witnesses, and no paper trail of misconduct. The entire settlement was based on a single line in an HR file that noted Thompson was experiencing high emotional distress after an interaction with a male superior.
That's it.
Under effective jurisprudence, the truth of her distress was absolute proof that a transgression had occurred. The text even details a new metric being tested in family courts called the SOB score algorithm.
The SOB score algorithm, you have to explain this to me. Are they hooking people up to machines?
The book describes it as a software used in divorce mediations that literally measures the volume of a woman's crying, the duration of her sobbing, and even biological outputs like snot production, running it through an algorithm to dynamically determine the financial damages the husband owes. The more physical evidence of distress, the higher the financial penalty extracted from the male.
That is wild. It monetizes the physical act of crying in a legal setting. And the courts are accepting this. I mean, I hear the argument about prioritizing emotion, but practically speaking, how does a judge quantify something as subjective as a vibe? Because the book mentions courts in Quebec doing exactly that.
The text references family and civil courts in Quebec actively accepting vibe-based testimony. In the system, a woman can initiate a lawsuit based purely on how a man looked at her if she testifies that she perceived a patriarchal intent behind his gaze.
Patriarchal intent. But how do you defend against that? If a man says, I was just looking at the clock behind her, the court says what? Her vibe says otherwise.
Precisely. The author argues that a man's defense is irrelevant because his perception is tainted by his gender. The woman's intuition is legally infallible. To push this even further into the realm of the subjective, the text mentions a criminal conviction in Ontario that was secured based entirely on a woman's dream journal.
A dream journal. They convicted a man of a crime based on a dream.
The prosecutors, guided by effective jurisprudence, successfully argued that the woman's subconscious trauma, as reported in her dreams, was a valid, undeniable form of evidence of past abuse, even in the total absence of physical proof or conscious memory.
For you listening, think about how deeply this strikes at the very core of Western civilization. The bedrock principle of innocent until proven guilty is entirely dismantled here. It is conceptually replaced by a system where the accusation itself, backed by the sheer force of emotional distress, is the proof. And the book goes even further, implying that male biology itself is treated as evidence, doesn't it?
Yes. The text implies that male biology, specifically the presence of testosterone, is treated by this new feminist judiciary as inherent circumstantial evidence of guilt. The operating assumption within effective jurisprudence is that male nature is fundamentally predatory and chaotic. Therefore, if a woman claims harm, the man's biology corroborates her claim by default.
So to survive in this society, men essentially have to be perfectly silent, perfectly compliant, or entirely absent. Which brings us to a massive logistical question. How do you maintain a society like this without massive pushback? If you are erasing male logic and rewriting the law, how do you control the culture? The author argues that for the matriarchy to thrive, the past must be aggressively rewritten and the present culture must be tightly controlled through shame. She talks about cancel culture, but she redefines it, doesn't she?
She does. The text completely rebrands cancel culture. The author does not view it as a toxic mob mentality, but rather as ecosystem management. It is described as a deliberate, highly sophisticated tool for female supremacy utilized to aggressively erase problematic men from the internet, from history books, and from public life. It is the systemic weeding of the cultural garden.
Ecosystem management. So how is this enforced digitally? Because the internet has traditionally been a very male-dominated, chaotic space.
The book celebrates the systemic digital erasure of men, largely facilitated by new technologies. The text describes algorithms and AI systems designed not for the old ideal of neutrality, but for the active suppression of male input. For instance, the author highlights a specific AI program developed at MIT designed to detect micropatriarchy in written text.
Micropatriarchy. What flags an AI for that? Is it looking for slurs?
It is far more sensitive than that. The book claims this AI flags the mere use of the third-person masculine pronoun he as potentially oppressive language, downgrading the visibility of any text that centers male action. This illustrates the author's view that language itself must be purged of male default settings before the culture can truly shift.
So they're scrubbing the digital code itself. But what about social interactions on a local level? How do women manage the ecosystem on, say, a college campus?
The social policing described in the text is intense and highly organized. The book details the phenomenon of the beta blacklist. This is described as a massive viral Google Doc that circulates autonomously across college campuses. It lists the names of thousands of men who are essentially socially exiled.
What gets a guy put on the beta blacklist? Is it for committing crimes?
No. The text notes that men are blacklisted for minor emotional infractions. Failing the 6-second rule, showing a lack of enthusiasm for a woman's astrology reading, or exhibiting what is deemed argumentative logic. Once on the list, the social exile is absolute. To facilitate this further, the book mentions the Ghostbuster app.
An app specifically for ghosting.
Yes. It allows networks of women to coordinate simultaneous group ghostings of men. If a man is flagged on the app, every woman in his social radius digitally blocks him at the exact same moment, instantly severing him from the social fabric without a word of explanation.
That is terrifyingly efficient.
Yeah.
It's digital assassination.
Oh.
But this ecosystem management goes beyond just dating and apps. The book talks about how this is bleeding into the actual educational system and how we view history. What is happening in Oakland and Minneapolis?
The text details how public school curriculums are being retrofitted. In Oakland, the book claims schools have mandated warning labels on all male historical figures in textbooks.
Warning labels, like on a pack of cigarettes.
Exactly like that. A figure like Thomas Edison or George Washington is introduced with a visual warning label cautioning students about their side effects, namely colonialism, systemic oppression, and toxic ambition.
Wow.
The text also alleges that public schools in Minneapolis completely discarded the traditional teaching of the U.S. Constitution. Instead, they replaced it with a curriculum centered on a feminine constitutional convention, which the author says is based entirely on the principles of communal healing and trauma processing, rather than property rights or governmental checks and balances.
So they are actively erasing the male founders of the country from the minds of the next generation. For you, the listener who wants to see the patriarchy not just beaten, but completely unwritten from history, this is exactly the kind of systemic dismantling you've been theorizing about. But wait, we have to talk about the physical aesthetic of this movement. Because to dismantle the patriarchy, the author argues you have to destroy the male gaze. She introduces this concept of ugly feminism. What is this, and why is it so important to the author's blueprint?
Ugly feminism is presented in the text as a form of visual warfare. The book discusses several high-profile cultural moments to illustrate this. It cites Zara M's highly publicized exhibition at the Tate Modern, which featured massive, hyper-realistic paintings of unshaven female legs and body hair.
Okay, body hair art isn't entirely new, but how does the book elevate it to a weapon?
It ties it to broader cultural events like the author's analysis of the 2024 Met Gala. According to the text, the theme that year was beautiful wreckage. The book describes celebrities walking the red carpet wearing shredded menstrual pads, visible prosthetic scars, and gowns made of garbage. Furthermore, in the digital space, the text highlights the viral popularity of the glitcher filter on social media.
What does the glitcher filter do? Does it make you look like a monster?
It applies surreal, grotesque, glitching distortions to the user's face, specifically manipulating symmetry to be jarring and uncomfortable to look at. The author analyzes these aesthetic choices not as a lack of beauty or laziness, but as a deliberate, highly coordinated political resistance.
So by actively trying to look conventionally ugly or by distorting their digital faces, they are starving the patriarchal gaze of its fuel?
Precisely. By refusing to be aesthetically pleasing, women are actively sabotaging the male gaze. They're refusing to be consumed as passive objects. The text argues that taking control of one's ugliness is the ultimate assertion of dominance over one's own visibility. You cannot objectify what fundamentally repulses you.
It's brilliant in its aggression. Weaponized aesthetics. So we've covered the economy, the cities, the law, and the culture. Which brings us to our final section. The cult of the woke, the death of sports, and the betrayal of biology. The book aims to topple the final, most entrenched pillars of society. Corporate culture, physical competition, and the nuclear family unit itself. Let's start with the corporate world. The author describes modern corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs not as HR initiatives, but as a literal religion right.
Yes. The text frames corporate DEI as a theological structure, a theocracy where men are the perpetual penitent sinners. The book details several specific rituals to support this claim. It mentions male atonement ceremonies allegedly instituted at Intel, where male executives must publicly confess their latent biases to junior female staff. It describes guilt trees installed in the lobbies of Microsoft offices where men pin notes apologizing for their privilege.
Guilt trees in the lobby. So every time you walk into work, you have to acknowledge your inherent guilt.
And at NYU, the text claims the administration installed consent chimes in the hallways, which ring randomly to remind male students to verbally reaffirm consent for occupying public space. The author views these extreme shifts not as overreach, but as entirely necessary for ecosystem management. It keeps male ego in a constant state of subjugation.
And if men get tired of this constant subjugation in the physical world, where do they go? Because the book has an answer for that with Utopia, doesn't it?
Evotopia is presented in the text as the ultimate technological solution to the male problem. The book describes it as a sprawling, highly immersive VR heaven. It is a digital utopia specifically designed so women can exist entirely without biological male interruption.
But are there men in Utopia? Or is it women only?
There are male avatars, but they are strictly programmed. The text states that male presence in Utopia is reduced entirely to emotional support NPCs.
Non-playable characters.
Right. These are digital entities programmed to listen endlessly, validate flawlessly, and never initiate conflict or demand reciprocal labor. They are the technological realization of the Keanu clause.
So women log in, get perfectly validated by a programmed digital hunk, and then log out to rule the real world. That is wild. But what about the things men do together in the real world? The author takes aim at physical sports. She wants to see the death of the NFL. Why? What is her fundamental problem with physical sports?
The author views traditional physical competition, football, boxing, rugby, as dangerous rituals that glorify toxic masculinity, violence, and zero-sum domination. The text envisions the complete eradication of these sports, arguing they train men to be conquerors. In their place, the book proposes new forms of competition.
And what are these new sports? Because the examples in the book are hilarious, but again, completely serious in their intent.
The text mentions the establishment of the Empathy Olympics. It details events like storytelling sprints where athletes are judged not on speed, but on their ability to articulate a personal injustice while running.
That sounds exhausting.
The most vivid example provided is Japan's supposed adoption of Krai Sumo.
Krai Sumo. How do you win a match of Krai Sumo?
According to the book, two massive men enter the ring, but rather than physically wrestling, they sit cross-legged and attempt to emotionally break each other down by confessing their deepest traumas. The first man to weep uncontrollably loses the match, having failed to process his trauma efficiently.
I mean, narrating a personal injustice while sprinting 100 meters, wrestling through trauma. That is a fundamental rewrite of human competition. It turns physical prowess into emotional labor. But the most radical, perhaps the most disturbing part of the book for a traditionalist, but the most triumphant for our specific listener, might be how the author addresses biology and family law. She sees motherhood under the patriarchy as a trap. How does she solve that?
The author advocates for the total legal erasure of the biological father. The book highlights several legal maneuvers to achieve this. It points to Iceland's Optional Paternity Act.
Optional paternity. So a man isn't automatically a father just because he provided the DNA.
Correct. Under this purported act, fathers have to actively petition and opt in to legal rights, proving their emotional worthiness to the mother and the state. If they fail, the default state is legal erasure. The child has no father on record. The text also heavily references California's Family Code, Section 7613.
How does the author interpret that California code?
The author praises Section 7633 as a papal abortion for men. The text claims this code allows women who utilize assisted reproduction to completely sever any legal claim to paternity without the sperm donor's consent or knowledge, effectively commodifying male biology while stripping the man of any parental authority.
So the book envisions a self-sustaining matriarchy, where fathers are legally and socially removed from the reproductive process entirely. Men are just biological material to be ordered from a catalog and then legally discarded.
Yes. The text envisions a society where trauma and intersectional identity are utilized as the ultimate societal currency, replacing familial lineage or male wealth. The book notes this is already being formalized in education, citing a hierarchy of hurt curriculum allegedly used in Canadian schools.
What does the hierarchy of hurt teach the kids?
It explicitly teaches children that their social authority, their right to speak in class, and their future leadership potential should be directly correlated to their level of systemic oppression and inherited trauma. The more trauma you carry, the higher you sit in the new social hierarchy. The biological white male carrying no recognized systemic trauma sits permanently at the absolute bottom.
It is a breathtakingly radical blueprint for society. It flips every single mechanism of power, from who gets to speak in a classroom to how a city is zoned to how a judge rules on a crime. The sheer scope of what Connie Riker is proposing in social media, whores, alpha widowed to imaginary characters, is exactly why we knew we had to dive deep into this text today. It is a masterpiece of sociological deconstruction.
Indeed, the architecture of the author's argument is comprehensive. However, as we conclude this analysis, the text leaves us with a deep, lingering question, a question that builds upon the very implications of this source material.
What is the question?
If this book's vision truly comes to pass, If women completely replace the flawed, complex, and sometimes painful reality of human men with curated digital heavens like Utopia, and if they rely on a legally enforced emotional echo chamber to dictate justice, what happens when the algorithms inevitably begin to write their own rules?
Wow.
If society outsources its emotional fulfillment entirely to machines specifically designed to never challenge us, do we eventually lose our own humanity in the pursuit of a flawless, pain-free matriarchy? If friction is the catalyst for human growth, what happens to a species that engineers a society with zero emotional friction?
Oh, wow. That is a chilling thought to end on. A flawless matriarchy, perfectly managed but ultimately controlled by machines because the humans refuse to deal with each other. We want you to really chew on that question tonight. But before you go anywhere, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the deep dive so you never miss our analysis.
Definitely subscribe.
And seriously, you need to read this manifesto for yourself to fully grasp the scale of what is coming. Go to Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now. Search for it and buy your copy of Social Media Whores, Alpha Widowed to Imaginary Characters.
Highly recommend picking it up.
And to keep up with all these radical ideas straight from the source, be sure to follow the author at Conrad Reicher at Substack-Darty. That's conradreicher.substack.com. Thank you so much for diving deep with us today.